December 1944. The frozen forests of the Ardennes. As German panzers smashed through Allied lines in Hitler's desperate final gamble, Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower faced a crisis that threatened to split his armies in two and turn the tide of the entire war. When he called his generals to an emergency meeting at Verdun, France, on December 19th, one man made a promise so audacious, so seemingly impossible, that it left the room in stunned silence. What did Eisenhower tell his staff when George S. Patton declared he could disengage 3 full divisions from active combat, wheel them 90 degrees north through ice and snow, and attack the German flank in just 48 hours? The answer reveals one of the most remarkable military maneuvers in history, and a moment of leadership that would help save the Battle of the Bulge. The situation was desperate beyond measure. On December 16, 1944, 29 German divisions, over 200,000 men supported by nearly 1,000 tanks, had erupted from the supposedly quiet Ardennes sector. Adolf Hitler had staked everything on Operation Walk am Rhein, a massive surprise offensive designed to split the American and British armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies into a negotiated peace. The Germans achieved complete tactical surprise. Entire American units were overrun in hours. The 106th Infantry Division, fresh and inexperienced, lost 2 full regiments, nearly 9,000 men, in the opening days. The critical road junction at Bastogne was surrounded. Allied supply lines were cut. Panic rippled through headquarters from Paris to London. Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., commanding the U.S. Third Army, was at that moment engaged in heavy combat 150 miles to the south, driving toward the Siegfried Line and the industrial Saar region. His army, consisting of 6 divisions totaling over 250,000 men, with thousands of vehicles, artillery pieces, and supply trains, was fully committed to offensive operations against determined German resistance. The logistics alone were staggering. Fuel depots, ammunition dumps, field hospitals, and communication networks all oriented eastward toward Germany. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force SHAEF was in crisis mode. The carefully planned Allied advance into Germany had been thrown into chaos. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery wanted to consolidate, to pull back and establish defensive positions. Many staff officers feared the worst, that the Germans might actually reach the Meuse River, perhaps even threaten Paris itself. Eisenhower, the supreme commander, knew he needed a counterattack, and he needed it immediately. But who could deliver it? Which units could be pulled from the line without collapsing the entire front? The arithmetic seemed impossible. On December 18th, as German spearheads pushed deeper into Belgium and the situation around Bastogne grew critical, Eisenhower's headquarters sent urgent messages to all army commanders. Prepare for an emergency meeting at Verdun. The tone was unmistakable. This was a moment of supreme crisis. Patton received the summons at his headquarters in Nancy, France. While other commanders saw catastrophe, Patton saw opportunity. His chief of staff, Brigadier General Hobart Gay, would later recall that Patton's eyes lit up at the news. "Brad's in trouble," Patton said, referring to Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commander of the 12th Army Group. "We've got to help him out." But the challenges were enormous, almost incomprehensible. To disengage from active combat operations and execute a 90-degree turn of an entire army in winter conditions defied conventional military wisdom. The textbooks said such a maneuver required weeks of planning, careful coordination, and extensive preparation. Consider the logistics. The Third Army's combat units were spread across a front of over 70 miles. Artillery batteries had established firing positions. Supply routes stretched back dozens of miles. Tank formations required fuel dumps positioned for eastward movement. Infantry divisions occupied defensive positions and attack positions against German forces that weren't about to simply let them walk away. The roads themselves posed a nightmare. December 1944 brought one of the coldest winters in European memory. Temperatures plunged well below freezing. Snow and ice turned narrow French and Luxembourg roads into treacherous corridors. A single broken-down vehicle could halt an entire column for hours. The Third Army's operational area was crisscrossed by these inadequate routes, many barely capable of handling normal military traffic, let alone the massive redeployment of an entire army. Colonel Halley Maddox, commanding the 10th Armored Division's Combat Command B, described the situation. "We were in the middle of attacking the Siegfried Line fortifications. Our tanks were engaged with German pillboxes. Our infantry was dug in, and suddenly we're told to prepare for movement north. North? We didn't even have maps for that sector." The communications challenge was equally daunting. In 1944, military communications relied on radio and telephone wire. Moving an army meant establishing entirely new signal networks, new code systems, new coordination with units you'd never worked with before. The Third Army would have to coordinate with the battered First Army units in the north, with units they'd had minimal contact with during the campaign. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Harkins, Patton's Deputy Chief of Staff, had been gaming out exactly this scenario. Unknown to most, Patton had anticipated German counteroffensive capabilities and had ordered his staff to develop contingency plans. On December 12th, 4 days before the German attack, Patton had told his planning staff to prepare 3 possible operations to relieve an attack in the Ardennes sector. He'd even given them code names: Southpaw, Nickel, and Boxer. This foresight was vintage Patton. While other commanders focused solely on their immediate objectives, Patton's restless military mind constantly evaluated threats and opportunities across the entire theater. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, had been warning for days about German buildup opposite the 8 Corps sector. Most had dismissed these warnings. Patton had not. But even with contingency plans sketched out, the reality of execution seemed nearly impossible. The plans existed only on paper, theoretical exercises that had never been tested against the friction of actual military operations. By December 19th, as Eisenhower's staff car arrived at the 19 Corps headquarters in Verdun for the emergency conference, the situation in the Ardennes had deteriorated further. German forces were now within miles of the Meuse River. The 101st Airborne Division and remnants of other units were completely surrounded at Bastogne, fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. American casualties were mounting by the thousands. The psychological impact was devastating. After months of steady advance, the Germans were pushing the Allies back. The meeting room in the cold stone barracks at Verdun was tense with anxiety. Present were Eisenhower, Bradley, Lieutenant General Jacob Devers, Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder, and other senior commanders. The faces were grim. Maps showed red arrows, German penetrations, stabbing deep into American lines. Blue symbols representing American units were scattered, disorganized, some with question marks indicating their status was unknown. Eisenhower entered the room and immediately set the tone. According to multiple accounts, he looked at the assembled officers and said firmly, "The present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this conference table." It was classic Eisenhower, refusing to accept defeatism, demanding his commanders see possibilities rather than limitations. But the reality remained. They needed a counterattack force, and they needed it within days, not weeks. The discussion began with a brutal assessment of available forces. Montgomery, commanding in the north, was consolidating his defensive positions. He wouldn't, or couldn't, provide relief forces immediately. The U.S. First Army was reeling, trying desperately to establish coherent defensive lines. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were already committed and surrounded. That left Patton's Third Army as the only significant uncommitted force capable of mounting a serious counterattack. But Patton's army was 150 miles south, fully engaged in its own operations, and pointed in entirely the wrong direction. Eisenhower turned to Patton. The conversation that followed has been reconstructed from multiple sources, including notes from Bradley, Patton's own diary, and memoirs of officers present. "George," Eisenhower said, "I want you to go to Luxembourg and take charge of the battle, making a strong counterattack with at least 6 divisions. When can you start?" The room went silent. 6 divisions, a massive commitment, and the implied question hung in the air. How long would it take to organize such an offensive? Weeks? A month? Some staff officers estimated it might require 3 weeks minimum just to plan and prepare such an operation. Patton looked at the map for just a moment, then replied with absolute certainty, "As soon as you're through with me." Confusion rippled through the room. Several officers exchanged glances. What did that mean? Eisenhower pressed, "When can you attack?" Patton's response stunned everyone present. The morning of December 22nd, with 3 divisions. The room erupted. It was impossible. Absurd. Officers began speaking over each other. That was only 48 hours away. Not nearly enough time for such a massive redeployment. Some thought Patton was grandstanding, making promises he couldn't keep just to appear bold and aggressive. Eisenhower himself, according to witnesses, stared at Patton with a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Don't be fatuous, George," he said, using a tone that suggested he wasn't sure if Patton was serious or engaging in his usual bravado. But Patton was deadly serious. He pulled out a small notebook and began outlining exactly which divisions he would commit: the 4th Armored Division, the 80th Infantry Division, and the 26th Infantry Division. These units, he explained, could disengage from their current positions, execute the 90-degree turn north, and attack toward Bastogne by December 22nd. The audacity was breathtaking. Military doctrine held that such a maneuver required meticulous planning, sequential movement of units, careful coordination of logistics. What Patton was proposing violated nearly every conventional principle of military operations. "This is no time for a slow, methodical attack," Patton declared. "We need to hit them hard and fast before they consolidate their gains." Bradley, who knew Patton's capabilities better than anyone, looked skeptical. "George, that's going to take a lot of staff work. Are you sure your people can handle this?" Patton's response revealed the secret. His staff had already done the work. "Brad, I've got 3 plans ready. All I need to do is pick up the phone." He proceeded to outline Operation Nickel, the middle option of his 3 contingency plans, which called for precisely the attack he was now proposing. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't bluster or wishful thinking. Patton had anticipated this crisis and prepared for it. While everyone else had been caught off guard by the German offensive, Patton's Third Army had contingency orders already drafted, reconnaissance already conducted, movement tables already prepared. Colonel Harkins would later write, "The plans existed in detail: march routes, fuel distribution points, artillery displacement schedules, communications protocols. We had officers who'd already driven the routes. We had liaison officers identified to coordinate with First Army units. We'd done everything but push the execute button." Still, the skepticism remained intense. Major General Harold Bull, Eisenhower's operations officer, questioned whether 3 divisions would be sufficient. Others worried about the southern flank. Wouldn't pulling Patton's forces north leave dangerous gaps that the Germans could exploit? Patton addressed each concern with precision. He'd already ordered the 12th Armored Division and other units to cover his southern sector. The attack toward Bastogne would be concentrated and powerful. 3 divisions driving up the narrow corridor might actually be more effective than a broader, more dispersed assault. Speed and aggression would compensate for numbers. But could it actually be done? Could over 130,000 men, with thousands of vehicles and hundreds of artillery pieces, actually disengage from combat, will 90 degrees, and launch a coordinated attack in just 48 hours during one of the worst winters in memory? Eisenhower made his decision. Looking directly at Patton, he gave the order, "Do it." What happened next became one of the most remarkable logistical and tactical achievements in military history. Patton immediately left the meeting and began issuing orders. The carefully prepared contingency plans swung into action. At 1900 hours on December 19th, coded messages went out across 3rd Army's communications network. Execute Operation Nickel. Staff officers who'd been waiting for this signal sprang into action. Movement orders that had been drafted days earlier were distributed to division commanders. Route assignments were issued. Fuel distribution points were activated. The 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General Hugh Gaffey, received orders to begin disengaging immediately from its positions near the Saar River. This was no simple withdrawal. The division was in active contact with German forces. Battalion commanders had to coordinate fighting withdrawals, pulling back their forward elements while maintaining enough strength to prevent German pursuit. The roads became rivers of military vehicles. Sherman tanks, their tracks grinding on ice-covered roads, formed massive columns stretching for miles. Half-tracks carrying infantry rumbled north. Artillery batteries limbered their guns and joined the procession. Tank destroyers, supply trucks, ambulances, engineering vehicles, all flowing north through the freezing darkness. The 80th Infantry Division, the Blue Ridge Division, faced an even more complex challenge. Major General Horace McBride's infantry regiments were dug into defensive positions east of Luxembourg City. They had to execute a delicate maneuver, hand over their positions to arriving replacement units while simultaneously organizing for rapid movement north. Infantry soldiers, many of whom had been in the line for weeks, packed their gear, boarded trucks, and moved out into the night. The 26th Infantry Division, the famed Yankee Division commanded by Major General Willard Paul, began its own pivot from the Saar front. These soldiers had been fighting brutal close-quarters combat against German positions. Now they found themselves on trucks heading north toward an entirely different battlefield. The logistical miracle unfolding across eastern France and Luxembourg was unprecedented. 3rd Army's quartermaster units worked around the clock establishing fuel dumps along the new route of advance. Signal Corps teams laid thousands of yards of telephone wire, establishing new communications networks. Military police directed traffic at critical intersections, preventing the catastrophic jams that could paralyze entire divisions. The weather remained brutally cold. Temperatures dropped to near 0 Fahrenheit. Soldiers rode in open trucks, their uniforms offering inadequate protection against the wind. Frostbite cases began appearing almost immediately. Vehicles broke down. Frozen fuel lines, dead batteries, mechanical failures from the extreme cold. Maintenance crews worked desperately to keep the columns moving. Major Albinir Zick, commanding the 8th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, described the movement. "We moved through the night, a serpent of steel crawling through frozen villages. The exhaust from hundreds of engines created a fog that mixed with falling snow. You couldn't see more than a few vehicles ahead. Men dozed in their seats, exhausted. But we kept moving. We had to. Critical to the success was Patton's personal leadership. He didn't remain at headquarters. He drove the routes himself, appearing at critical junctions, encouraging traffic control officers, checking on units. His presence electrified the troops. Men who were cold, tired, and confused suddenly found renewed purpose when they saw their army commander standing in the snow, urging them forward. By the evening of December 20th, 24 hours into the movement, the operation was ahead of schedule. The 4th Armored Division's lead elements had covered over 100 miles and were approaching their assembly areas near Arlon, Luxembourg. The infantry divisions were flowing north in organized columns. The miracle was actually happening. But the real test would come on December 22nd, when these units, tired from their extraordinary march, operating in unfamiliar terrain, coordinating with units they'd never worked with before, would have to launch a coordinated attack against prepared German positions. 3rd Army staff worked feverishly to coordinate the assault. Attack plans had to be developed, reconnaissance conducted, artillery fire support arranged. The units would be attacking north toward Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne and other forces had been surrounded for days, running low on ammunition, food, and medical supplies. The pressure was immense. Patton knew that every hour of delay meant more casualties in Bastogne, meant the Germans had more time to consolidate their penetration. He drove his commanders relentlessly. We attack at 0600 on the 22nd. No delays, no excuses. At 0600 hours on December 22nd, exactly 48 hours after the Verdun Conference, American artillery opened fire along a narrow front north of Luxembourg City. Minutes later, the 4th Armored Division's combat commands surged forward, their Sherman tanks and armored infantry advancing into German-held territory. The Germans were caught off guard. They'd been expecting American forces to remain on the defensive, to consolidate and absorb the German offensive. Instead, a powerful American attack was hitting their southern flank precisely where they were most vulnerable. The 5th Panzer Army, driving toward the Meuse, suddenly found itself threatened from an unexpected direction. The fighting was fierce and brutal. Winter conditions made every mile an ordeal. Villages became fortified strongpoints that had to be reduced one building at a time. German forces, including elements of the elite Panzer Lehr Division and the 5th Parachute Division, fought desperately to stop the American advance. But Patton's divisions drove forward with relentless determination. The 26th Infantry Division attacked through Arsdorf and Biggenville. The 80th Infantry Division pushed through Merzig and Edelbruck. And the 4th Armored Division, spearheading the advance, fought its way mile by bloody mile toward Bastogne. On December 26th, 4 days after the attack began, elements of the 4th Armored Division's 37th Tank Battalion made contact with the 101st Airborne Division's perimeter at Bastogne. Lieutenant Charles Boggess, commanding the lead tank, radioed back, "Come here. I'm in Assinois. This is it." The siege was broken. The relief of Bastogne became one of the iconic moments of World War II. But it was Patton's extraordinary maneuver, the 90-degree turn of his entire army, that made it possible. In just 72 hours from the start of movement to the launching of the attack, the Third Army had accomplished what military experts considered impossible. The casualties during the operation were significant but sustainable. Third Army suffered approximately 15,000 casualties in the first week of operations in the Ardennes, far less than the surrounded forces at Bastogne had suffered, and far less than would have been lost had the German breakthrough continued unchecked. What did Eisenhower tell his staff after Patton delivered on his seemingly impossible promise? The historical record provides the answer. On December 23rd, as reports reached SHAEF headquarters confirming that Patton's attack was in full force, exactly on schedule, Eisenhower sent a message to Army Chief of Staff George Marshall. Patton has done exactly what he said he would do. His Third Army has mounted a major counteroffensive in less than 3 days. It's the most brilliant operation of the war. Privately, Eisenhower told his staff something even more revealing. According to his naval aide Captain Harry Butcher, Eisenhower said, "When Patton made that promise at Verdun, I thought he was either crazy or the most confident commander I've ever seen. Now I know he's a military genius. What he's accomplished violates every rule we teach at Staff College, and it worked perfectly." The 90-degree turn became a legendary maneuver studied in military academies worldwide. It demonstrated several critical principles: the value of contingency planning, the importance of aggressive leadership, the necessity of well-trained and flexible staff officers, and the power of determined execution. For Patton personally, the operation validated his entire approach to warfare: bold, aggressive, based on speed and shock rather than methodical set-piece battles. He would later write in his diary, "The relief of Bastogne was not just a tactical victory. It was proof that audacity, properly planned and violently executed, will always defeat caution." The German offensive, Operation Wacht am Rhein, was stopped. By January 1945, the Bulge had been eliminated and American forces resumed their advance toward Germany. Hitler's gamble had failed, costing him irreplaceable reserves of men and equipment. The war in Europe would end less than 5 months later. The story of Patton's 90-degree turn and the relief of Bastogne has been told many times, but its full significance often goes unappreciated. This wasn't just about one general's audacity or one army's achievement. It was about the triumph of preparation, leadership, and human determination in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. Consider what was actually accomplished. Over 133,000 soldiers moved an average of 75 miles in winter conditions while maintaining combat readiness. Over 250,000 tons of supplies were redirected and repositioned. Thousands of vehicles operated around the clock in sub-zero temperatures. Artillery batteries displaced and redeployed while maintaining fire support. Communications networks were completely reconfigured. And all of this happened not in weeks or months, but in days. The men who executed this maneuver, the truck drivers navigating icy roads through the night, the staff officers working by candlelight to coordinate movements, the combat soldiers who immediately attacked after their grueling march. These men performed one of the war's most remarkable feats. General Eisenhower, in his post-war memoir Crusade in Europe, devoted significant space to this operation. He wrote, "The brilliant execution of the Third Army's movement to the north must rank as one of the most astonishing feats of generalship of the entire war. That it was done in minimum time with troops already engaged and without unduly weakening the Southern Front is a tribute to staff work and troop discipline of the highest order." Years later, military historians would analyze the operation in detail. They identified several factors that made success possible: Patton's foresight in developing contingency plans, the Third Army staff's exceptional competence, the superior training and flexibility of American units, the effectiveness of American logistics and communication systems, and the indomitable will of the soldiers themselves. But perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated what General George Marshall would later call the American way of war: the ability to adapt quickly, to discard doctrine when necessary, to trust subordinates with initiative, and to execute complex operations with speed and determination. The legacy of those 48 hours extends beyond military history. It's a testament to what can be achieved when bold vision meets meticulous planning, when audacity is backed by competence, and when leaders refuse to accept conventional limits on what's possible. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.